So that is climate change. It's big and it's emotional, of course. And there's lots more to say about it. But this is just to get you to think about it even more in relationship to the course. I just wanted to share with you one part of a poem that I think was quite interesting in relationship to climate change. And this is the one. Climate change is the result of business as usual. Climate change is not going to be business as usual. Bill Smith wrote that, and it's a longer poem. But I think that what we have been talking about in this course up until now is business as usual. And we're not going to have that paradigm in the future. We're going to have some change. We'll see what it is. So I think it's interesting to consider climate change in relationship to everything else that we're talking about. Is it still relevant to talk about the things that we've talked about in this course if we consider the magnitude of climate change? And here's one question you can think about. According to Kevin Anderson, we need to transform from 81% carbon dioxide dependence to 0% carbon dioxide infrastructure. What implication does that have on innovation and entrepreneurship? What does it mean for the way we think about innovation and entrepreneurship? And the way we think about everything we're taught, everything we learned in the course. Okay, that's something to think about and discuss perhaps amongst yourself if you want to. Now we're going to move on to economic growth. Economic growth is measured as the percent rate of increase in real gross domestic product, or real GDP. And what does that mean? Well, GDP, the gross domestic product, that measures the value of economic activity within a country. It is the sum of the market's values or prices of all final goods and services produced in an economy during a period of time. And if you want GDP per capita, meaning that you take the population into account, then the GDP is divided with the country's total population. So you measure how wealthy a country is, how much value and money has been made in that country during 1 year, basically. And when you look at growth, how GDP is growing, it's a percentage of the GDP then. And when you look at growth for a longer period, it becomes exponential. So basically, simple calculation here. If you have the GDP in 2018, and we want to, and we saw that, okay, in 2018 the economy grew by 2.3%. That means if we take the GDP in 2017 and take that times 1,023, you would get the new GDP. So this is not rocket science, but I just wanted to show you that then if you want the GDP in 2030, and we assume that it's the same growth each year, it probably isn't, but if we would say that it's the same growth, then we would just add this numbers for each year. So we would get the number of years here as an exponential number, so that it's really a lot of growth. So the economy would be 65% bigger in 2030 if we have a growth rate of 2.3% each year, which is important to consider when you think about growth. It might sound low to just have 2.3% growth, but it is exponential and you get a lot bigger markets after a while. And innovation is often talked about as connected to growth. Innovation is believed to lead to growth, and that is one of the rationales why innovation is good. And there are countless of reports and scientific articles about how innovation generates growth and which kind of companies and how can we stimulate it. And the entire innovation system builds on this idea that we want growth. Drivhuset is one of the parts of the innovation system, kind of trying to get innovation out there and trying to get entrepreneurs out there. And the rationale behind that is that it will give growth to society. And we believe, many of us, that growth is a foundation for a good life, that we need that in order to have good lives. And it's also some kind of ethical rationale behind growth, that it makes life better for everyone, and that means also that we get less poverty. We're helping people through the economic growth is the best way and to lift people up from poverty, and it makes life better for everyone. But is this the most effective way to diminish poverty? That's one question you could ask. And when you consider growth, in other contexts, that would be kind of personal growth, or it will be the growth of a plant or a tree or something like that. Here's a picture of the growth of a tree. However, when it comes to trees and living organisms, there's something happening after. There's no infinite growth. A tree eventually, something happens with the tree eventually. It does not continue to grow forever. It can become a dead tree, it dies, or it can become lumber or a house or something else entirely. Something happens after growth. And for some reason, it's not really considered acceptable to talk about this. And if you want to mention degrowth, you risk being seen as a bit weird or illogical or irrational, because we're all so set on growth. It's viewed as so important. But then others, especially in considering climate change, would argue that the Western societies and the industrialized societies are actually overgrown and we do not need more growth. And there's also the argument that we're actually a lot richer than we were in the 70s, but we're not happier. And another critique is that growth is not benefiting the vast majority of the population primarily. It mostly goes to those who already are rich. And that is Thomas Piketty, that you might know about in his book Capital in the 21st Century, where he showed that the income inequality has actually grown since the 70s. Another critique is that productivity has gone up a lot faster than the salaries. So the money do not go to the people working, it goes somewhere else. And then one question we could ask is, can we detach innovation and entrepreneurship from the notion of growing economies, or do we need growth in order to have a rationale for innovation and entrepreneurship? And here's one quote from Serge Latouche, who's a professor of economics at the University of Paris Sud. And he says that anyone who thinks that infinite growth is consistent with a finite planet is either crazy or an economist. The problem is that now we're all become economists. And I'm going now to show you a clip with a author who's been talking about degrowth, and he's going to just briefly explain what degrowth can be, and that it does not necessarily mean that we would not have good lives.